3, 2. Okay, welcome to the mini lecture on monopoly, which is the topic of chapter 9 in the OpenStax book. All right, first, we'll talk about how monopolies form and what the barriers to entry are. We'll talk about how a profit-maximizing monopolist actually chooses the output and the price. Let's take a look back in time here and look at the political power from a cotton monopoly. The year is 1860. It's the United States, specifically the southern United States, and it had a near monopoly really in the cotton that was supplied to Great Britain. Now, these states actually attempted to leverage some of this economic power into political power, trying to sway Great Britain to formally recognize the Confederate States of America. This goes to show you how much power they actually wielded. Now, let's take a look at monopoly in the modern day, right? Now, monopoly in the strictest sense is when you have only one firm producing all of the output in the market. That's actually quite rare. There have been circumstances in the past in which this has existed. In the modern day, what you have is monopolistic tendencies, because typically even the biggest monopolist, or quote-unquote monopolist, still has some competitors, but in the purest sense, it has none. So what are the barriers to entry? Well, they are legal, or they're technological, or they can be any market forces that discourage or prevent potential competitors from actually entering the market. And then you have natural monopoly, where the barriers to entry are something other than legal prohibition. And we'll talk more about that later. And then lastly, legal monopoly, that is laws that prohibit or severely limit competition. Right? So what's a natural monopoly? Well, natural monopolies arise especially in industries where the marginal cost of adding an additional customer is very, very low, like in electricity, for example, once the fixed costs of the overall system are in place. In smaller local markets for products that are difficult to transport, or when a company has control of a scarce resource or scarce physical resource, right? Now, of course, the electric power example is less of a good example now because of advances in technology that have allowed firms to produce the electricity off the grid and then allow companies to be able to sell that electricity to the incumbent firm. But that's a topic for another day. In any event, you get the main point behind what natural monopoly is. All right, now, if you look at economies of scale in natural monopoly, you can see in this market that the demand curve intersects the long-run average cost curve at its downward sloping part. So a natural monopoly occurs when the quantity demanded is less than the minimum quantity that it takes to be at the bottom of the long-run average cost curve, right? And so the government, in these cases, often creates barriers to entry by prohibiting or limiting competition. Examples of many of those legal monopolies are, of course, the U.S. Postal Service, which is provided for in the U.S. Constitution, and that is utilities, electric, water, garbage, etc., right? Now, there are other things that are important in terms of promoting innovation, but at the same time, they can also create a certain degree of monopoly power. The first is a patent that simply gives the inventor the exclusive legal right to make use of or sell the invention for a limited time. Trademark, anything that's an identifying symbol or name for a particular good, the shape of the Coca-Cola bottle, the McDonald's arches, the list goes on and on and on. Copyright, any form of legal protection that's to prevent copying for commercial purposes, original works of authorship, including books and music. And then lastly, trade secrets, any method of production that's kept secret by the producing firm. Of course, that's quite normal. Right? And then, of course, there's intellectual property, and that is simply the body of law, including patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secret law that protect the right of the inventor to produce and sell their inventions. It implies ownership over an idea, a concept, or an image, not necessarily a physical piece of property. And then, of course, there is the notion of deregulation. That is removing government controls over setting prices and quantities in certain industries, and we'll revisit that later. All right, so let's sum up these barriers to entry. When you look at a natural monopoly, The government often responds with regulation or ownership. Examples of these are water and electric companies. When you consider the barrier to entry is control over a physical resource, usually there's no government role. De Beers for diamonds is a good example of that, because they simply have a lock on many of the diamond reserves in the world. That's becoming less and less of a lock as we are discovering diamond mines in other places of the world and are actually beginning to excavate out of those mines. And then you have legal monopoly, and of course, the government does have a role there. I mentioned, of course, the post office, past regulation of airlines, the trucking industry, the railroad industry. And then patent, trademark, and copyright. Is there a government role? Yeah, through the protection of intellectual property. Examples of these are drugs or software. And then lastly, intimidating potential competitors. Is there a government role? Well, sure, somewhat. It's kind of fuzzy because you're not sure exactly what is it they're doing to intimidate unless it's an overt intimidation that's easy for anybody to see. And the examples of these are predatory pricing, well-known brand names. Well-known brand names, that's kind of a little difficult because that doesn't sound like you're doing anything to really overtly intimidate the competition, but it can be intimidating because some brand names are so strong and they garner such strong brand loyalty for the consumer that it may be difficult to overcome if you're a potential competitor, right? The other potential way to intimidate competition is through what is called predatory pricing. That is, when a firm uses the threat of sharp price cuts to discourage competition. It's actually a violation of U.S. antitrust law. The stickler about this whole thing, it's very difficult to prove, right? Whoops, didn't mean to skip that one. Now it turns out, when we take a look at how a monopolist maximizes prices, it's really no different than any other firm. That is, it's still going to set output such that the marginal revenue from the sale of a unit is just equal to the marginal cost of that unit. So a monopolist can charge any price for its product, but the demand for the firm's product constrains that price. So it can't really do just whatever it wants. So because the monopolist is the only firm in the market, its demand curve is really the same as the market demand curve. That's a very unique sort of aspect of monopoly power, right? On the left, what you have is a perceived demand curve for a perfectly competitive firm, and you can see it's perfectly elastic, meaning if the firm raises the price even by a little bit, it's going to lose all its sales. Now for the monopoly, that's not true, but increasing price can cost it some sales, not all the sales, but some, so it has to be careful that it prices appropriately. So the flat shape over on the left means that the firm can sell either a low quantity or a high quantity at exactly the same price. But over here, this demand curve is showing for the monopolist that price and quantity demanded are inversely related. All right, so first, a monopolist demand curve is really the same as the market demand curve, as I just mentioned, for most goods, and that is it's downward sloping. So if the monopolist chooses a very high level of output, it can charge only a very low price. In other words, if it wants to sell this quantity, it can do so, but at this lower price. Conversely, if the monopolist chooses a very low level of output, he can do that too, but of course it's going to have to charge a higher price, right? So the challenge for the monopolist is really to produce that combination of price and quantity that maximizes its profit. Its job is not to charge the highest price possible. Its job is also not to sell as many units as possible. Its job is also not necessarily to constrict output. It's just to choose that output level that maximizes profit. Okay, so let's take a look at total cost and total revenue. First of all, total costs rise as output increases. That's not surprising, right? Second, the highest profit will occur at the quantity where total revenue is farthest away from the total cost, right? So let's take a look at that. You can see total revenue, it's rising, and it's rising at an increasing rate. It maxes out, and then it declines. The total cost rises at an increasing rate and increases very quickly and very steeply, and then crosses the total revenue curve. This is called the break-even point. But the monopolist, nor any other firm, is interested in just breaking even. They want to maximize their profits. So they want to choose the output level that maximizes the difference between these two things. So certainly it doesn't want to be over here, it's not maximum. Doesn't want to be over here, it's not maximum. It's going to choose that point where my forefinger and my thumb are furthest away from each other, right? So total revenue for the monopoly firm is called, in this particular case, we're calling it the health pill monopoly. It first rises, then it falls. The low levels of output bring in relatively little total revenue because the quantity is so low. The high levels of output bring in relatively less revenue because the high quantity pushes down the market price. And so the total cost curve is upward sloping, right? So profits are going to be the highest at the quantity of output where total revenue is most above that total cost, right? The profit maximizing a level of output is not the same thing as the revenue maximizing level of output, which should make sense because profits take costs into account while revenues don't. So in the real world, a monopolist often doesn't have enough information really to be able to analyze its entire revenue or entire total cost curve. The firm doesn't really know exactly what would happen if it were to alter production dramatically, right? However, a monopolist often has fairly reliable information about how changing output by small or moderate amounts will affect its marginal revenues and its marginal costs. And of course, lastly, the marginal profit, the profit of one more unit of output is computed as marginal revenue minus cost. All right, and in the next part of the lecture, we'll continue on with the rest of the segments about how firms actually maximize profits. Until next time. Set alarm for 2 minutes.
Setting the alarm. Okay, I set an alarm for 11:10